All right, so let me the methods sort of remind me of macros from what I know about them. Yeah, that's pretty. I think macros are methods within visuals, all your Microsoft applications, right? They have their short little pieces of code that do some specific function, right? And that's basically what methods are. And we're getting into that right now. So let me go share my screen. It's like modeling your own Lego pieces. Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. Yes. They make your code kind of modular. Yes, and that's one thing we'll talk about. When designing your methods, you want them to be as modular as possible, right? So anyway, let's get into it. All right. If you remember in the last little bit of last lesson, we talked about variable scope, right? Let me pull up this chat thing so I see what everybody's saying, if anybody's saying anything, right? Does anybody remember what scope is? What is the variable scope? Yes, where a variable is relevant in the code or actually defined, right? If it's out of scope, the compiler doesn't even know what it is, right? It'll return that this variable is not defined, right? If it's out of scope. So if you get that, the actual error in C# is this variable is undefined in the current context. That's what you'll get. That is the exact error, right? And it means that your variable isn't in scope. You've used and sometimes that means you've misspelled it or you've got the wrong capitalization or whatever. But as far as the compiler knows, it's a variable it's not familiar with, right? All right. So anyway, I say all that to say methods are a specific scope, and you can define variables in a method, and the scope of that variable is local to that method. All right. The scope is determined by the opening and closing curly brackets, right? Because curly brackets define a block of code. Let me put that. I don't think I've said that before, right? Curly brackets define a block of code, right? This is a block, right? That's important. And I don't think I've explicitly stated that, so there it is. So, purpose of the curly brackets is to act as a container for a block of executable code. In the second chapter, you understood that a method is a code block that can execute just by calling the method's name, right? It's time to understand the importance of code blocks and the variables used in them. A method defines a code block that begins and ends with curly brackets. In this chapter, we cover the following: using methods in a script, naming methods the good way, defining a method, calling a method, returning a value from a method. Usually Landon does the page numbers for me because I don't have them. If somebody wants to tell me what page this actually starts on, that'd be cool, right? And if you can give me the end page too, where the summary is, that'd be cool. All right. So let's go. Next. Using methods in a script. All right. There are two reasons to use methods in a script: to provide a behavior to a game object, and to create reusable sections of code. As Jacob was just saying, It's kind of like your Lego pieces. Lego pieces are very modular, right? There's certain types of Lego pieces, and you see the same size piece over and over again, and you use them when you need them, right? That's what methods are, right? Methods get reused all the time, right? Anytime you start repeating the same lines of code over and over again, you should probably create another method to do that. All right, starts on 68, ends on 78. All right, cool. Thank you. So it's a fairly short chapter, thankfully, right? So we should be able to get through it all today. We got 45 minutes. All right. Let's see. All of the executable code in a script is inside methods of one sort of or another, right? The first purpose of a method is to work with the member variables of the class, right? The member variables store data that is needed for a component to give a game object its behavior. The whole reason for writing a script is to make a game object to do something interesting. The second purpose of method is to create code blocks that will be used over and over again, right? Like I said, you don't want to anytime you find yourself rewriting the same lines of code, you should go, maybe I should put that in a method, right? And then why is that useful, do you think? Why is it useful to reuse code rather than rewrite it, other than the obvious reasons? Other than, I just don't want to type it over and over again. Minimize chance. Yes, there you go, right? Reuse code. That's the most important one. Minimizes the chance of making a mistake while retyping and messing everything up. That and, right, what about if you did make a mistake, right? And you have to fix it, right? If you typed it 5, 6, 7 times, you have to fix it in 5, 6, 7 places, right? Also, if you just want to update your code, you want to change your code later, the fewer places you have to change it, the easier the maintenance is, right? Easier, and that's really the bottom line, easier maintenance, right? Maintenance is a big deal, right? If you create a piece of software that's really popular and there's 1 million people using it, a year after it's been out, technology changes. You might have to change that code to, be updated for the new hardware, like the new phone came out and you have to update it for that. You want to make your code easy to maintain so that you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours updating your code when you have to do that. So the easier you make it to maintain, the less cost you incur by having to pay programmers or do it yourself. So maintenance is a big deal, right? So well-written methods make your code easier to maintain, right? Very good. All right, so let's take a look at this quick example. Add and print 2 numbers. And we're going to do that since I have my Unity up, right? And it's called, well, again, I don't know if he's named this script or not. Let's see. We're going to call it learning script because he's fond of that. But the book used to be better about telling you what script to write and that sort of thing. Now it just kind of throws functions out at you and expects you to know where to put them. But anyway, so let's go ahead and create our scripts folder. Right, scripts. And we're going to create a learning script in there, right? Learning script. Later on, we'll create this script that's actually going to be using the assignment. This is just something that we can knock about in while we're going through the chapter. All right, so that takes a second. Then we open it the correct way by going to Assets, Open C# Project. Have you looked in the notes? Do you have the notes open, Jacob? Yes. You see my screen? That's no problem. I'm going to try to put that in the notes so that when we get started, it'll be obvious, right? Okay. All right. So is it open? Yes. No, not yet. Come on. One of them slow days. Whoa. All right. There we go. Let's see what we got here. All right, so I'll just go below the update function here, and I'll create void add and print two numbers. Int number 1, int number 2, curly bracket, curly bracket. Note what I do there, right? Everybody see that? This is important, so I want you to make note of this. When I type one curly bracket, I immediately go and type the matching curly bracket. Now, your Visual Studio might be set up to do that automatically, which can be useful, right? But why would we want to do that? Anybody have an idea? Why is that important? Why am I making a point of saying this? A horrible mistake. Yes, that is exactly correct. Because if I take out this final curly bracket, watch what happens. I take it out and look what we get. Right? See this red mark down here? That is an error, right? And it should. Is it going to tell me what it is? There you go. Well, it tells me. I'm surprised. It's actually telling me there's a curly bracket expected, right? It means if you match up, this is a very useful thing too. If you click on any curly bracket, right? All right. Well, it's gonna make okay. I'll click on that one right after it. You can see barely that there's kind of a highlight on the matching curly bracket, right? If I do this, it's matched there. If I do this one, it thinks it's matched to that one, right? Because I deleted one, which means the class ends without a curly bracket. So therefore, it is missing a curly bracket. So the reason to always, as soon as you type the opening curly bracket, always close it, and then put stuff in between it, right? I think of it as like a bun, right? You have a hamburger bun. You open the bun. You always have that the bottom and the top first, and then you put the stuff in between them, right? But so you always create the bun first and then fill it up. All right, so I'll rant on that more some other time. Int result equals number 1 plus number. Also, see, code completion is another way of avoiding mistakes, right? Because unless you're a great typist, and even if you are, you're still going to make mistakes occasionally. Let code completion do the work and do less typing and make fewer errors, right? Very important. Debug.log result. All right, so let's save that. We'll go ahead and stick that on the main camera. It doesn't really tell you to do that in the book, but we're going to do it anyway. All right, so do that. All right. Now, does he even call this function? Let's see what he does. All right, so I mean, he's not even showing you how to use it really. No, he doesn't. um, so he's not even calling this right now. But what this does, right, is takes these two numbers and then it calculates a result and then it outputs the result to the console, right? He is not calling this function for some reason, so we're going to do that just because why type all this in if you're not going to actually use it? All right, so we're going to say add and print two numbers, and then we'll just put two numbers in there, 5 and 10, let's say, right? Save that. We've already attached it to the main camera. Anybody want to give me a lag check before I do this? Are we on? Am I up to time? I was getting a good ping earlier, so I'm not sure. $9:23. Oh wow. Well, that stinks. Well, that's not good. All right, so I'm gonna run this and tell you what happens because you're apparently 3 minutes behind me. Yay. All right. So Command R will run it. What it's supposed to. Oh, Command P, sorry. Alright, go to the console. And if you were up to speed, you'd see that it says 15, right? I hate this lag, man, it's really bad. It makes teaching remotely very hard to do. Alright. Frustrating. Alright, naming methods properly. That's where we're at now. My screen won't show that for you because you're apparently a few minutes behind me. But anyway. Just as we learned from variables, right? We want to name our methods sensible names, right? Things that mean something. Since methods can make the game object do something useful, you should give your method a name that sounds like an action, right? Jump over the fence, climb the wall, right? You can look at those names and know exactly what the method is going to do. Don't make them too simple, right? They should be exactly as complex as they need to be without being more than that, right? Just like variables. So if you name it wiggle, wiggle what? If the method name causes you to ask a question, then it's probably not sufficiently descriptive. All right. Beginning method names with an uppercase letter. Again, this is a convention, not a rule, but it's one that you will find most programmers adhere to. So unless you have a reason for breaking a convention, you should, right? Oddly enough, he breaks the class naming convention near the end of this chapter, and I'm not sure why. I think I need to contact the author and ask him why, because it's kind of weird. All right. Using multi-word names for the method, just like variables, we use camel case to name our methods with if that has more than one word in it, right? Let's see. Parentheses are part of the method's name, right? If you look at the code here, like the start function has start and then opening and close parentheses. That is part of the name, right? Because it can have stuff inside of it that are called parameters, and we'll get into that in just a minute, right? All right, defining a method the right way. All right. The minimum requirements for defining a method. Just as there's a minimum requirements for declaring a variable, defining a method, there are minimum requirements for it as well. All right, so I'm going to copy those and we'll paste them right there. Right. All right, so number one, the type of information or data that a method will return to the place from where it is called. Right? Some methods return values, some do not. Mostly we've seen the ones that do not. That's why it says void. Void means nothing, right? The space, like space, outer space is a void, right? There's nothing, there's no air there. I mean, there's things, particles flying through space, but for the most part, it's just empty space. That's why it's called a void, right? Sorry. Name of the method should be followed by a pair of parentheses. A pair of curly braces should be present to contain the code block, right? So here is a template for what a method should look like, right? Return data type. That is not a data type. That's just saying that that's where that would go. Name of the method, parentheses, code block. Note there's nothing in here, right? And he says, when you create a blank file in Unity, you get two methods for free, the start and the update, and they adhere to this template, right? One second, I think my mother-in-law is up and I need to do something. Mom, you all right? What are you doing? Why are you doing that? Your walker's over there. Sorry about that. All right. All right. Where was I? All right. So let's see a question. Have you ever had to have methods nested within methods? Generally, you don't want to do that, and I'm not going to say it's impossible to do, but generally, it's going to give you an error, right? Let's kind of get into really esoteric kind of programming, and the way you would do that is kind of beyond the scope of what I'm going to. Yeah, it can be, yes. Like I said, there are things called inline methods. I don't want to get deep into this because it's going to confuse people. If you want to look up inline methods. There are ways of doing it, but that's the only way I know of legally doing it in C#. Now, there may be other languages that allow you to do it. Languages are different, and part of programming is learning how all the languages are different, right? When you're popping back and forth between languages. All right, but yes, generally you don't want to try to do that because it won't work. First off, and like I said, there are things called inline methods that allow you to do that, but none of y'all in this class will need to do that. So, especially if you're an artist and you're not planning on being a programmer, just forget I even said anything about that, right? Just let it float right over your head. All right. Cora, what I was wondering was if methods have scope like variables do. Yes, they do. The method you can call that method within that class, right? They have the scope of a class, but if you make it public, it can be called from outside of the class. It has the same kind of scope rules that variables do. And I think he gets in that in a minute. I think we're getting the cart before the horse a little bit. All right. So he explains, we created the start. If you look at the start and update functions, you say the first requirement is type of data, right? Well, a void means it's not returning anything, so you put void there. The second requirement is the method name, which is start and parentheses. And the last requirement is the curly brackets. All right. So these adhere to those requirements. All right. So that's the bare minimum requirements. There are other things you can add, right? And you see the start function is empty, right? It says normally if we aren't going to use a method by adding code to a skeleton method created by Unity, we can simply remove it from our script. It's normally best to remove unused code after the script has been written. That being said, I always leave start and update in my code because as soon as I remove it, I need it and I have to retype it again. So, and my understanding is the compiler actually will remove it. It removes blank functions when it compiles it, so that's not really costing you anything to keep it in there, right? Let's see. There's no public modifier, which means it's private by default. So this method cannot be called from other scripts. And there's no code in the code block, therefore this method doesn't do anything. Let's see. Can unused code cause performance issues? Like I said, if the compiler doesn't compile it, it's not going to affect performance at all. It doesn't even get compiled. It's just ignored by the compiler. So no, that's my understanding of how the Unity system works, is that it ignores entirely blank functions. All right, so most of the code we're going to write will be inside of these two methods, start and update, but we need to keep in mind that we are able to create our own methods, allowing us to expand our capabilities even more, as we are going to explore in a moment. What he says there is true. As beginning programmers, especially in Unity, much of what we do is in start and update. But I don't know that he should have said that everything we're going to do is there, because you should really get your progress as a programmer is largely defined by how much you get out of using update for everything, right? Beginning programmers use update for everything because it gets called automatically 60 times a second, or roughly, right? And they know it's going to get called. They don't have to worry about it, so they stick everything in update. But that's a very kind of beginner way of programming. But this is a beginner book, so that's why he says that, I guess. All right, understanding parentheses. Why are they there? All right. So parentheses make a method easily identifiable because they're the thing with the parentheses after it, right? And we know a method block. Method is a code block that's going to be called multiple times. We remember the add and to print two numbers method, the only one we've created so far. But we've mentioned that a method can take some input parameters, so why is this useful? A script may need to add two numbers several times, but they probably won't always be the same numbers, right? We can have possibly hundreds of different combinations of two numbers that add together. This means that we need to let the method know which two numbers need to be added together at the moment when we call the method, right? So now he actually uses this function, which is kind of... he should have told you to create this class earlier before he typed the print. I have to take issues with the author sometimes. All right. If you want to create a script called learning reusable methods, that's fine. I'm going to keep using learning script because that's what I have open. All right. So he's now using this function unlike he was doing before. So let's just do that real quick. All right, so we create some class variables here. What is the lag now? Nine. Not too bad. Only a minute. All right, so we're going to create some class variables. All right, public int number 1 equals 2. Public int number 2 equals 3. Public, oh, what the? Right, public int number 3 equals 7. All right, and then add. Excuse me. I'm just going to. I'm gonna be lazy. You'll see me being lazy here. All right, well, in a minute you'll see me being lazy. And I'm going to copy that function call and paste it twice, and then I can just come in here and replace these numbers with these variables. Number 1, number 2, and number 1, number 2. Oh, that's wrong. Number 3 is supposed to be. All right. Number 2, number 3. Actually, I'm going to get lazier. Let's not call it lazy. We'll call it efficient, right? So programmers are not lazy. They're efficient. All right. So that should do that, right? So we called that several times. Good. We'll save that. And we'll run it. 5, 9, 10, right? It works. All right. All right, so we've declared these variables. These are called class variables because their scope is within this whole class, right? And let's see. So we declare this function, add and print 2 numbers, and then we call it 3 different times, right? Each time it takes these parameters, right, and these arguments to the parameters and sends it to the function, right? And they come in here, these values get transferred, and then it does something with them and it outputs it. All right. Let's see. Does that make sense? Anybody questions about that? All right. Here we go. The parameters. Let's do that. So the code in between the parentheses is called, these are called parameters, right? And what is sent, right? When you actually call it, let's see, these are arguments, right? So arguments and parameters have to match up, right? So you have to send, if your parameter is asking for an int and you send a float, it's going to give you an error, right? So the arguments have to match the parameters, right? Very important, right? Let's see. right, so specifying a method's parameters, right? If you look up the word parameters in the dictionary, your brain will probably seize up. There's a lot of different definitions of parameter, right? All right, so in the earlier screenshot, we declared first number, second number, is type int, right? Now notice our member variables, number 1, number 2, number 3, they're also of int type. These variables have to be of the int type since they store the numbers that will be added to the method, right? So parameters are really just variables, right? You're really just declaring variables in here, right? It's just as if you had declared them up here. You never use you never have to use a privacy declaration there because they're always going to be local to that function, right? So down here, number 1, number 2, these are local number 1s, and number 2, these are not the same number 1s and number 2 is up here, right? Which can be confusing. In fact, if we wanted to change that to make it less confusing, we can right-click on a variable name and we can say rename, and then say num1, right? And then I'm going to do that same thing for that. Num2. Can you add a float and an int together, or will that cause integers? I mean, usually you have to cast it. What you're asking is trying to combine two data types together, and usually that will give you an error. We can try it, right, just to see. So let's do that. That's a good question, right? Num4 equals 5.0f, right? And it's going to give you an error, I'm pretty sure, right? So we'll say float error add equals number 3 plus num4, and let's see what happens. It didn't immediately give me an error. So what's happening here, right? There are times when you need to convert one data type to another, and sometimes C# and other languages will do that conversion for you, right? That is called, and this is for the programmers. Really, the artists can tune out a little bit, but when it does it for you, it's called implicit conversion. It does it for you, and it appears that this is, in fact, doing that. I'm going to see if it doesn't give me an error doing this, then it did, in fact, do that, right? So I'm just going to try it because I'm interested, because I didn't think it would do that, honestly. It converted it implicitly to an integer, so there is no, well, let's see, I can't say that for sure because I don't have, it's 5.0, which means it probably truncated that. So let's make 5.5 and see what happens, right? So let's do that. Yep, it still truncates it. So it converts it to an integer implicitly, which you didn't have to ask for it, right? But you can do that on your own. So let me see. If I wanted floats, for instance, this is way outside of what we need to be doing, but anyway, you can explicitly explicitly convert something. So I'm going to convert the number 3 to a float by putting in parentheses float right next to it, right? And then this should actually, now it's adding 2 floats, and it shouldn't truncate the decimal point. All right, so interesting. It did though. So I'll look into that. Anyway, I'm not sure why I did that. I'll get back to you on that. That's outside of what we're doing here anyway, so we'll cover that later. All right. So how many parameters can a method have? As many as you need, right? I mean, there's just a physical, kind of logical, common sense. Don't get crazy with it, right? But you can have as many parameters as you need to put in there, right? There really is no limit other than what your computer's RAM can hold, which is way more than you'll ever put in there, right? All right. So use as many parameters as you need. Make it reasonable what you actually need, but as many as you need. Returning a value from a method. All right. And this is the actual assignment here, right? So, returning a value. Everything we've done now has been void. All the functions we've had have been void, right? So they didn't return a value. But sometimes you want to, and that's what we're going to do now. So you define what you need to return, right? And then you make sure you return that. And the second part here is what we're going to do. I'm not sure why I did it twice. All right. So we're going to do this grand total, return total. And you'll note that what rule does he break here? A convention that he breaks here. You see that? And I don't know if you see it or not because you may be 5 minutes behind by now, but he starts his class with a lowercase letter, which he earlier said was strictly a no-no. So not sure why he does that. Anyway, we're going to type all this in here and get on with it because this is the assignment, and we're almost out of time. All right, so so I'm going to create a return total script, because that's what it's calling for, and that is the assignment, so C# script. And I'm going to start it with a capital letter, unlike he did, like that, because I want to stick to the convention that he said he sticks to, right? All right. So we got to move quickly. I'm about out of time. Public int number 1 equals 2. He's doing this again. I'm going to copy those. This is me being lazy again, or efficient as I call it. Public int number 4 equals 8. All right. And then, all right, here he is calling. One thing I want to make sure that you know, this is a strict rule I have, right? These packet pub authors love to call functions before they define them. You should always define your functions before you call them. That way, when you start calling them, code completion will know what they are, and it'll do the work for you, right? So always when you're writing code, don't treat it like a letter home to your mother. Treat it like you're writing code, right? So you don't just start from the top and go to the bottom. sometimes you have to bop around a little bit, right? So we're going to say int add to numbers int first number int second number, and we'll say int result equals first number plus man, if I can type, second number, return result, and then we say void display result int total and we just say debug.log the grand total is plus total. So we're concatenating there, right? All right, so there, that is the whole file, right? We have 4 minutes, so we're going to come over here in the main camera. I'm just going to disable that script for now. Return total, place that on the main camera. All right. Make sure this works, and then we'll do the UI text real quick, right? Oh, we didn't call. I didn't go back and call the stuff, so I'm stupid. All right. Stop. All right. All right. Yeah, we got to do the stuff in the start function. All right. So int sum result equals add two numbers, number 1, number 2, right? Int sum another result equals add two right, to number what is it doing that? Right, add numbers, number 3, number 4, display result, some result, and display result, some another result. All right. All right, since we're running out of time, I'm going to quickly do what you know you have to do is the UI text, right? So we know we need to use UI text. We're going to say using Unity Engine .ui, right? And then we're going to say public text, output text, like that, right? Then in our display result, we're going to say output text plus equals that, right? Paste that. And I'm going to add the inline character there, like that, right? Why is it giving me that? Oh, I know. Dot text. All right. Okay. All right. So now we just need to create the UI text in Unity and connect it. So let's do that. UI text. Right. Get the 2D here. Text. Let's go to the camera. Turn that to black. Oops, got the. All right, text, overflow, all right, center, but no, there we go, and make it bigger, 8, main camera, none text there. I'm just going to go with text. You should name this output text, but I'm out of time, so it should do it. All right. Note that new text shows up here, and you don't really want that. That's because I'm concatenating here, right, the very beginning, and by default it says new text if you come in here. If you don't want to do that, you can just delete it like that and then run it, and you shouldn't have that. Another way to do it is to clear it out in code, right? So this is what you would be in with. This is what you would package up, build your WebGL here, and put your C# code in there and zip it up and send it to me. All right, but we are out of time. Are there any questions?